Guided by the light, I can see things without in your touch. I'm burning in the night. I want your touch. Nothing I can do. Yeah, I know. Let me go. Burning by the light, I can see things without your touch. Hello, and welcome to Practicalli with me, John Stevenson. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope everybody's safe and well. It's a very chilly world outside for me at the moment, and I'm all wrapped up nice and warm otherwise. So today we're going to look at Brave Clojure, and I guess part of the reason for doing this was there's a separate book study group going through this, and it's been ages since I've read the book, and I did notice there's a few things that are a little dated. Overall, the book is still extremely relevant, and there's lots of really interesting things in the book, so I thought it was a useful way to just review it and give kind of like a record of kind of my opinions and hopefully your opinions about what the book covers. So just before we start, just a quick reminder, as always, website. If anybody wants to redesign my website and make it a little bit less messy, that would be quite appreciated. It's it needs a bit of UX and design love, I think. I'm going to try and simplify it a little bit, make it easier to find the relevant parts. Any suggestions on how I can improve it, that would be grateful. Obviously, I'm very grateful to all the people who subscribe to my YouTube. We're almost at 1,000. Way! And we've also got thank you for people for donating via PayPal, and also a big thank you to Cognitech for sponsoring me via GitHub sponsors. It was a really surprising and welcome boost to the end of the year. So that helps me get motivated as well. But also, like, just the fact that people are giving me comments and asking questions is still the biggest motivation there. So I did mention the book club. I'll put the link in the chats as well. So there's this book club that's been run by somebody else that's quite good. So again, this is set up for helping beginners get into Clojure, and they have done the first meeting already, but that was mostly just to get set up, and so the next one is going into actually doing things with Clojure. So I'm actually going to be covering what I guess the same chapters that they covered in the first meeting on the January 6th. Okay, what am I doing? Oh yeah. So the book. So if you go to braveclojure.com, and you can buy the book, but you can also read it online for free as well. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it does get recommended quite a lot. And it does have a certain quirky style that some people like and some people not so keen on, but it does cover a lot of the kind of important kind of topics in Clojure as well. So I'm not going to read it all because that would be very boring. So just some acknowledgements, blah, blah, blah. We go. So the introduction. So it does have this very stylized way of discussing things, and which is it's quite fun. And so we're going to look at the environment setup, which I think is the chapter that needs the most kind of updating. If you're going to write it today, there are well, not necessarily changes, but additional things you would do there as well. And I'm not going to tell you that Emacs is the one true editor. It is very popular in Clojure circles, but there are other choices as well. So we'll have a quick look at those towards the end of this broadcast. And then in later broadcasts, we'll delve into the language fundamentals and so on, and try and keep that as practical as possible as well. So this is not going to be quite as practical. We're not going to be doing any coding, but we are going to be looking at just getting comfortable with the REPL to start with. And that is what this next chapter is. And so feel free to ask any questions as we go along in the YouTube chat, like Bobby Towers has just done. There we go. Oh, interesting. Somebody's saying that yeah, a certain amount of the population has no sense of humor. Sense of humor is very personal. Again, some people love this book. It's like Marmite. Some people kind of love it, and some people hate it, or Vegemite. It's one of those things that people like. I think there's a lot of really interesting things in here, but yeah, it's not necessarily for everybody. So when you're starting with Clojure, I think getting comfortable with using the REPL is very useful. And I think understanding what the REPL is, what people mean by the REPL, is also quite important. If you go to, let's see, if I go to my book for a moment, and we go to Practicalli Clojure, then I do have this graphic on the front page, which is trying to convey the fact that the Clojure REPL is both a what have I done there? Yeah, the Clojure REPL is both a process. So this is this read, evaluate, print loop, but it's also like like people refer to the UI as the REPL as well, especially in terms of the command line. So I've started to refer to this as like the REPL UI or the REPL terminal UI, and your editor is a REPL user interface as well. Because you're working in the editor, you're evaluating code from files, and that's being sent to this REPL process in the background, and you're getting results. And the same way with like data inspectors as well. They kind of user interfaces on top of the REPL. So when people are talking about the REPL, they may be talking about this process that gives you this really fast feedback. Or they might be kind of talking about actually typing things in. When they talk about typing things into a REPL, it might be they're actually really talking about typing things into the REPL UI, as I term it. Hopefully that makes sense. So what is Clojure? So we're going to talk, I guess we're going to be doing kind of building projects. That's definitely kind of evolved quite a lot. Building projects is pretty much the same. So it's executing in jar files. There's just a new tool to do that, the Clojure CLI Tools. Clojure's forged in the mythical volcano by Rich Hickey. That may not be entirely true. But it is, Clojure is on the JVM. You don't need to learn the Java language. It is useful to know a little bit about the JVM ecosystem, and obviously you can tap into all the libraries that are on the JVM. So you can use libraries from Java, you can use libraries from Scala, JPython, all the other JRuby, all the other kind of languages that are run on the JVM. You can use their libraries as well. So there's a huge amount of things you can tap into, but then there's an awful lot in Clojure itself as well. I think in terms of data science, there's quite a lot of kind of Java and Scala libraries that people are still using. But then a lot of the time there's wrappers around those as well, which adds not just a wrapper, but kind of a nice API to use those Java libraries and Scala libraries as well. So saying here, the JVM process executes Java bytecode. Yeah, so I think one of the nice things about Clojure is you don't actually have a very visible compile cycle. You don't actually have a separate compile cycle. You kind of, it's kind of abstracted away by the evaluation of code. So when you evaluate code, it's compiling it in the background and sending it to the JVM, and then you get a result. But it's kind of all very seamless. So it's quite nice to see that. A pedagogical device. I'm not quite sure what that means, actually. I'll come back to that in a moment. So Clojure, yeah, so Clojure, this is at 1.9, so we're on Clojure 1.10.1, I think 10.2 is coming out soon, so it's interesting times, although like Clojure itself doesn't change hugely, and it's very additive as well, so I think it's one of the reasons why a lot of the libraries that look like they're dormant are actually still very healthy and very used. They're just kind of finished and they don't need any major changes because the underlying Clojure language hasn't changed very much. Anything else we need to mention? Yeah, so we're going to write Clojure that's going to run on the JVM, and when we're ready to ship this, we can deploy it. We can package it up as a jar file and then distribute it, and that's what ends up on Clojures. We can just create a jar file of our library and put it on Clojures and share it with everybody else, and then we can create an uberjar to distribute an application, and an uberjar is just your application plus Clojure, so it runs everywhere. So you don't need to install Clojure in your Java environment. You can just basically install a file in the right place and have a little shell script to run it, and that's the simplest possible way to deploy Clojure. So let's have a look, see what it's doing. So it's suggesting we're using Lining. Whereas if you go to clojure.org today, then when we go to get started, it's actually suggesting Clojure CLI Tools. Now, there's nothing wrong with Liningen, but I think Clojure CLI Tools over time, will it replace it? I'm not sure, but it's certainly a lot more people are using Clojure CLI Tools for new projects, and it does offer an amount of flexibility. One noticeable thing is that it might be slightly faster to start up because it's only actually running one Java virtual machine, whereas when you're using Liningen, you're running two virtual machines, one for running Liningen itself and the next one for running your application or library. So let's have a look at Liningen. So we can create new projects, we can run Clojure projects, we can build them, and there's lots of kind of plugins to extend Liningen as well, and different ways of doing things. But the simplest thing is, yeah, you can just create a new application. So let's go on to, oh, I don't have, yes, let's switch over to switch over to my editor, my terminal window. That's the projects. Brave Clojure. And so I can run Liningen, create a new application. It's all very straightforward. and it's created a new directory for me. And it's pretty standard. So there's been like a de facto standard for the structure of Clojure projects, which again was probably legacy adopted from the Java world, and also the C++ world as well, C#. This is source and test parallel trees, and we've got our application or library code in one tree and the code that tests it in a matching file with just the -test afterwards. And that's pretty. And then doc, or actually this really should be, potentially this should be docs, because then you can put this onto GitHub pages and just serve it up if it's docs. But doc seems to have been the unfortunate shortcut on there that we'd have to change. But then you can create, we're using a template here called new, and you can create your own templates and obviously use a wide range of existing templates as well. So that's the classic way of doing it. That's what Brave Clojure is suggesting. We can also use Clojure CLI Tools. So I have something set up called project new, and there's a few examples here. So we can, I could create like a fig wheel project, which is a Clojure script project. In this case, we're adding reagent to that as well, which does the same thing. It's actually using the same template that you would do if you're doing a line new fig wheel main project as well. This is a slightly larger template, so it will download a few extra things. So it does take a little bit extra to do something. And then if we have a look, if we have a look, then we've got tree landing page. So the source and test are the same. And the main difference between these two projects is the fact that we're using deps.edn here, whereas in the tree for the lining an app, we're using, oops, where is it? Tree. Then we're using this project CLJ file. Project. So this is a Clojure expression. This is Clojure code, which I thought was great. That you can define the project configuration using the language, so you don't need to use XML, which can be a bit fiddly for humans. It's great for computers, but it's not so great for human digestion. But this def project does have a few kind of interesting aspects. So it is a macro itself, so it just expands to something else, and it's kind of declarative, but not quite as declarative because it's still an expression in Clojure. But most of the time you're doing like key value pairs in there. So what Clojure CLI Tools does instead is use a deps.edn file. So if you have a look at landing page, deps.edn. So this is like proper declarative stuff. So it is just a hash map, which makes it easy to actually process this. So for like tool developers, this makes it really easy to work with because it's just a Clojure hash map. And so it's very easy to check, and also things like CLJ Condo will be able to check this very easily for you and show you if you've got any issues because it's hash map. So it does make it a little bit easier for tool developers and just simpler to write as well, because it's not within the context of a function. So this is just pure Eden. And this is essentially just adding dependencies, saying where the source code is, and just defining this idea of aliases, which is also in Leiningen. You can also use aliases in Leiningen. But these are very much like just pulling in libraries and occasionally setting main namespaces to call the -main function from. So inside this fig wheel tool, which is a build tool for compiling Clojure script, there's a fig wheel main namespace, and inside that namespace there's a -main function, which is just going to call with some options there as well to generate a build, and we can add a live one here that will compile it and send it to our live environment. So that's this is like a really flexible approach, and this is extended out to, we go to Practicalli Clojure. Oops. There is the deps.edn configuration I've got, and so this contains all the user tools, so things like different REPLs you can run. So there's a lot more. I find it a lot easier to extend the REPL experience using Clojure CLI Tools than I would do with Leiningen. You can do that. Leiningen's extension mechanism is plugin approach, which is very bespoke to Leiningen, whereas this is you can pretty much add any libraries you want very easily just by doing extra dependencies, and then that library is only included when you actually use the alias. Again, that's already there in Leiningen, although I don't see many people using that. But you can then also include Java options. Here I'm using Java options to set a theme for this data inspector called reveal, and you can also define the functions to run. And if we look at, where is it, creating projects here, we can also create projects. So we can use the main ops, so calling the -main function from a particular namespace. But there's also a new approach where we're using exec function, so we can actually define a function to call, and this doesn't need to be -main. This could be any function that you specify. It just needs to be qualified with a domain, and so this allows a lot more flexibility and freedom to create some really interesting tooling, some really interesting libraries and applications to work with as well. Okay, so I think I will get there eventually. There's a few questions that people have asked. I'll get to that towards the end as I'm cover the editors. So in a way, it doesn't matter if you choose Leiningen or CLI, Clojure CLI Tools initially. The code is going to be the same. I think the only things I can think of where it would be different is if you're using a tool like if you're using Clojure Composure. I think there's a Composure template, and this uses a ring plugin for Leiningen. So when you actually do these things, you kind of run sort of line ring server, and that injects things. So that injects code into the running process just to make it simpler to actually run a web application. But this seems to be more the exception rather than the rule. So as long as there aren't any Leiningen plugins, you can actually just convert a Leiningen project just by adding a deps.edn file with all the dependencies. And I think in the vast majority of cases that would just work. And then running a Clojure project. So we can run have we run REPL? We haven't run the REPL yet, have we? So this is just showing you. So yeah, -main. This is like the classic way of writing a main function that plays something that will run when you run the application. Oh yeah, so we got here line run. Boom, boom, boom. Oh, I forgot where everything is now. There we go. So if we go into and do line run, then run the application. Oh, world. There we go. Let's see. And if we do the equivalent of noob, so if we do Clojure -m, so -m is specifying that we're going to use -main, and we're going to use project. I spelled Clojure wrong, that's why. There we go. There we go. Oh, there you go. And then rather than main, I'm just going to use a simple app. Practically. One of the things that the Clojure CLI Tools does encourage or enforce, I think, is having a proper, like, qualified namespace. So I'm using Practicalli, which is my GitHub name, but you could use your company name here, and then the actual name of the project or library you're creating. So this is using the same app template as Liningen, or a copy of that in this case, but most of the time you can just use the same templates. Okay, cool. And so if we go into Practicalli Clojure noob, oops, can't type today. We look at the README file. The README file nicely tells you how to run the project as well. So instead of doing line run, it's a little bit more verbose, but it's still fairly easy. But it's very explicit about what it's doing, so it's quite nice. Yeah, there we go. So we're using the M flag to say we're going to call Clojure main, because we can also Clojure can also call that Clojure exec as well. So that's why you have M. So you can either have X or M, and so that will do different things. M will call Clojure main, X will call Clojure exec. And then because we're using Clojure main, we're specifying the main namespace. If you run that, we get the same result as running line run. Hello world, amazing. I see the discussions are already talking about later chapters, so that's good. I'll kind of make a note of those for the later broadcasts. So most of the operations, especially all the common ones, are pretty much the same. It's just a slight syntax change. Clojure CLI Tools does give you extra options and features, and I think it's a bit more flexible as well. So I think when you're ready, then it's certainly worth learning more about Clojure CLI Tools. Let's see, where did we get to? Yes. I'm a little teapot short and spout. And then we can run line uberjar. So uberjar will create not just our application, but also it will include Clojure itself, which is a rather small jar. It's only about 3 megabytes. So it doesn't really add a huge amount to the file that you need to deploy. So if we pop out of here and go into the Clojure noob, and if we have a look at the project file again, just quickly, we can see we're actually defining the main namespace here, so that Liningen knows what it is, and we're also defining this profile to do ahead of time compilation for all of them. So this can make the code load a bit faster because it's all been pre-compiled. It's not strictly important, but there's some interesting discussions about that which we'll leave for another time. So line uber jar. And then it's just compiling. So for a beginner, I think line does have a slight edge of being slightly simpler because you just run these commands and they're very simple. But it's very easy to set up Clojure CLI Tools to be able to do the same thing as well. So here it's generated 2 files. So we've got the Clojure Noob snapshot jar, and then we've got the standalone jar. And if you can't remember which is which, then I just do L, and whichever's bigger has got the Clojure thing in there as well. Oh, and they've put that into target, so we need to go into cd target jar, and let's do that again. And he can tell which one has Clojure in because it's the bigger one. And so this one, this is like a jar of just your thing. You could put that onto Clojures. This has got Clojure in it. So as this is an application, we can actually run that because it's got the code has got a -main in, so we could actually run that on the command line as well. Does the book cover that? Yeah. Oh, yeah, there we go. And then the book nicely covers that as well. So we can just use Java jar to run it. And we've got inside the jar, there's a manifest file that actually defines what the main function is to call. So it's very easy for just using normal Java normal Java command to start it. And this is the way I typically do it in production as well. Because you don't really need to run a Clojure environment because you've got Clojure self-contained inside the jar. So just using Java it removes a layer of indirection rather than using lining and or CLI tools to actually run the application in production. Oops, wrong one. So we do Java jar on one of these. The standalone, there we go, and it runs and it should return hello world. Oh, that was quick. So that was a little bit quicker, although not much difference because it's all pre-compiled, so it does run a little bit quicker on the JVM. Although there's still some advantage in having uncompiled code, because if your code runs better with the Java hotspot running, then it can kind of do some more optimizations there as well. And you may want more dynamic aspects in your code as well. But if you really want to make it really fast, and you can also compile this natively with Graal, but that is another episode entirely. Okay, and so there are just the same things for Clojure CLI Tools, so you can do an uber jar for that. So if we pop out of here, Practicalli, we do a less the deps file. And you can see it's, because we're using this template, it's generating a test alias, so we can use that when we want to do some testing. We've got a test runner. So this is adding the test path and the library we might want to use for testing. So here we're just adding test check, which will be on top of Clojure test itself. And here we've got runner, which is just specifying the Cognitex Labs runner, which is a nice kind of simple to use test runner. Just point it at your tests. If you've written them in the normal kind of style of Clojure unit tests, then it'll just pick them all up and run them. And yeah, and this is just using the main ops approach, actually in specifying tests there as well. So that might not be that useful there. But it's useful to have test paths in there just to be explicit. And so we've got also another alias called uberjar, which is doing the same thing, pretty much in the same way. This is using deps.edn, so it's the actual underlying tool that's creating the jar file is slightly different. And I do believe deps.edn is moving to version 2 at some point, so there are some underlying changes, but it won't affect the results really. It's just affecting the way it generates the results. It generates the jar file. And so this this uber jar is actually quite simple because we put all the configuration into the alias already, so you don't actually have to remember all this stuff. It is just part of the project configuration. And because this is generated for us, then unless we start changing our code to have a different main namespace, then it's just going to work out the box. If we do change our main namespace, then we just need to come in here and change this -m file there. But it does mean that we can go in and just do Clojure -m uberjar to do the same thing, which once you get used to it is about as simple as doing line uberjar as well. Oh, that did seem to be slightly faster. There we go. And just did that. And that's done a jar. How big is that? It has been a while since I've done that. Oh, that's quite big. So that's just creating an uber jar specifically. You can also add an alias to just create a jar file as well, which I do have in, I think I've got a Clojure -m project jar. And I think then you just need to specify the main namespace because this is just a generic generator of jar files. Let's have a look. Where is it? Let's do a jar project jar. There we go. Yes, and then there's an exec function as well as although I've just done this as exec function. Yeah, so I can just generate a jar and I can override it by just specifying the jar name, whether I want it to be ahead of time compiled, and then the main class in there as well. So I think if I do one, so we do project jar, and then we can do main class Practicalli Clojure noob something like that, and we can also do AOT true. So the nice thing about oh no, that's not right. Sorry, that should be X. Because we're now doing using Clojure exec here, so we can. Then the difference between Clojure exec is rather than using kind of more ad hoc options, more kind of Unix style options, we're actually adding key value pairs as options as well, which is more Clojure-y. So that is a slight change to get used to, and so this will then pass these values in as key value pairs, as like to form a map of configuration. Oh, there we go. Oh, maybe I didn't need to pass the main class in. Oh, there we go. And so that's created a jar file as well, project jar, and I could have given it a name as well. So if we do that, so it's very easy to do the same things. It's just slightly different commands. And let's go back to 2. If you go to my book, not that I'm plugging my book much. Never plug my own stuff, obviously. Then if we go to using Clojure Tools, there is a quick cheat sheet, as it were, to kind of show you what the how to do certain things, and there's also some more things inside the Clojure projects as well to show you how to work with Clojure projects. Yeah, so you can kind of show, like, shows you how to template using Clojure exec and Clojure main. So it's a nice kind of quick cheat sheet to get you going. Let's just have a quick look at the questions in the chat. I haven't been looking at those so much. So, yes. For beginners, to be sure to get a recent version of, so Clojure M and Clojure X are in a fairly recent version. So from September of last year, introduced Clojure M and Clojure X. So you do need, I think it's 1.10.1697 at least, but it is in the book. As to if you go into the install Clojure Tools, it does tell you which versions to install of Clojure. Or you just get the whatever's the latest on clojure.org basically, and then you've got the right version. Yeah, and it's also in the Clojure deps.edn. Oops. Yeah, there we go. So we're using, oh, there we go, I got it right. There we go. So as long as you're using that version or later, then you can use Clojure -M and Clojure X. If you've been using deps.edn for a while, then the -A is still working for now, but there's an encouragement to move on to -M and -X instead. And there's another question, do professional Clojurists use Lannigan though, or is it just all Clojure CLI tools? There's still a huge amount of Lannigan usage out there, and for most projects it doesn't really make much difference, but for newer projects and newer approaches, I think, if you're using things like the some of the data browsers, they're a lot easier to wire up with Clojure CLI tools. So if we go to data browsers, am I on the right one? No, there we go. If you go to data browsers, then some of these tools like REPL and Portal are easier to use with. I haven't actually got Portal working with Lannigan yet, so there could be an issue. But and then so these are more geared up towards Clojure CLI tools, and it's easier for tool developers to actually build things or using support Clojure CLI tools rather than Lannigan. So I think that's where the difference is. So I think there's going to be a slow and steady evolution towards CLI tools. But for writing your own projects, there's no issues with using Lannigan if that's what you're familiar with. But there are some opportunities to learn new things with Clojure CLI tools. I think that's how I'm going to pitch it for now. Okay, so we can do all the normal stuff, and then there's the REPL. Woohoo! Line REPL. I used to run this a lot when I was doing Clojure to start with, and I encourage you to be. It is a convenient way to actually run the REPL UI, terminal UI. It's very quick and simple to get spun up. So let's go into the right project. Clojure. And we can do line REPL, and this starts a REPL process. And if this is the first time I'd run a command in here, then it would download all the dependencies I've got in here. So we've got a REPL prompt. Line does some nice kind of things by default. So it does start an NREPL server. So if you wanted to connect to this project via Cider or Carver or Clojure or any editor that supports NREPL. I'm coming to that question, Daniel. So it's very easy to kind of connect. I could go into Cider or Visual Studio Carver and just do a connect to this REPL, and it should pick up the REPL port and do that. And the other thing that Lannigan does is it tends to you can set the default namespace, which I think some people complain about that Clojure CLI Tools doesn't do. But I think one of the reasons is that by default, Clojure will start in the user namespace, and then you've got all the kind of default tools like doc and so on. So I think Lannigan does some extra things to Does doc actually still work in here? It's been a while since I've used this. Let's do doc map. Oh yeah, so it's doing some things to, it must be injecting the Clojure REPL tools in there just to make doc map work, because doc isn't normally included in the REPL. So Leiningen is doing a few more things under the covers, which can be useful initially, but I think also it's hidden, so you don't actually understand fully what it's doing unless you delve into Leiningen in a bit more detail. And is there I think you can do quit now. You didn't used to be able to do quit. Oh, yeah, it works. And you can do the same thing for Practicalli. Oops, Broadway. There we go. So you can just do CLJ. You can just do Clojure inside the root of the project, and it will just run a REPL for you. It's really quick. It's only running one JVM, so it's a lot quicker actually. It doesn't give you the best experience because there's no history, readline history, and so there is this CLJ wrapper that's also included in this install. Oops, which adds a read line if you've got it installed. If you've got RL wrap, read line wrap installed, then it will give you history. Oh, there we go. So I've got the history of whenever I last run a REPL using Clojure. And so you can run these commands very easily. So it does add a nice touch to it. But if you want a really nice experience, then I use Clojure, which doesn't use RL wrap, but I do use -m REPL, and I've also got a REPL with an nREPL thing on there as well, so I can run REPL and it runs an nREPL server there as well. Let's just run REPL to start with by itself. So this does have a few dependencies, so when you first run it, it might take a few seconds to load, but it gives you some really nice, it gives you some help, REPL help. It's got tab completion, you've got different key bindings, themes you can set up as well. You can toggle whether you want to have LDoc on. So if you're typing in here, it's much better experience. So we can see the signature of the functions. And I think if we do Control X, Control D, yeah, there we go. Do Control X, Control D. That's the default for showing the documentation, so you can see the docs of the maps as well. So if you don't have an editor handy, or if you haven't set the editor up, then using REBL is a really nice experience as like a terminal command line. Boom. And you can also do oops, let's see, you can also do multiple lines. If I do line, this is a terrible example, sorry. I can keep on doing new lines until I press the closing bracket, and then it'll evaluate it as well. So it's very easy to write readable code, although that's not a great example, inside the REPL using REBL. So in my book, I do encourage the use of that if you're going to use a terminal REPL. And the advantage of a terminal REPL UI is it's just very quick and simple to get going with. If you want to load things in, then you can do like a require of namespaces, which also does tab complete as well, which is really nice. So I only typed in a few characters there and pressed tab, and it's completed the name for me. So I can require that, which is effectively kind of loading in that namespace. And then if I want to use it, I can do in ns quote, and it's giving me the signature of how to use this function. And I can do Practicalli there, and that puts me into the same namespace. So that's like, so that gives me the same state as lining and puts me into. So again, you can do the same things. It's just that CLI kind of does make a few more steps explicit, whereas lining kind of does a few things for you. I quite like this approach because you might want to require several different libraries in here, and you may or may not want to go into the new namespace as well. So it gives you more control over what you're doing. So yeah, maybe not quite as beginner friendly, but it's not too difficult, and it does teach you what's actually going on underneath. So it does help you understand how Clojure is working a little bit more, I think. And it has a nice, we do REPL, we can also quit. So there's a nice kind of sensible way of quitting there as well. If we go to commands, so we go back to Practicalli. So, oh, there we go. Yes. If we do rebel, so there's a few options I've got set up for rebel. So I can use that with nREPL. I can use it with reveal. And using it with portals fairly straightforward as well. It's just a library and then you call a few things. More, oops. How are we doing for time? Oh, I might not get down onto the editors. Yep, so you can do REPL for Clojure script, with an nREPL. And then because somebody asked, I'm just going to run this with nREPL. So let's do this. Boom, boom, boom. So this is an alias. This is the Clojure CLI project we're in. And if we do Clojure -m, and then, yeah, REPL, and then I'm not going to do figure wheel because I don't have a figure wheel project. So this is going to call REPL, but it's also going to run an nREPL server. So this is also what lining is doing by default. And then what I can do is I can go to my editor while it's waiting. So if we go back to if we go to open Clojure new, while that's running, we do oops, projects. Brave Clojure, Clojure noob. No, the wrong one. That one. There we go. And let's just open the source. Let's open the deps file. There we go. And if we go back to 1, yeah. So that started our Clojure REPL on the like an external REPL. It's got a local host and a port. So then if we go to our editor. I can do cider, so I'm going to do Sesman start, which gives us a few options about how to start the REPL. And so rather than jack in, I can just go and connect to that as well. And the advantage of that, so it's going to look on localhost, but you can also have remote servers here. So this is yeah, that's a remote server on Amazon somewhere that I've got a connection to. This is just localhost, and it's detected that there's a REPL running there, so it's giving me a choice about which one to use. So that's the default. Nope. And that should connect. Yeah, so it's connected. I've got the REPL window there. And if I open up some file, source, Practicalli new. Yeah, then I can go in and evaluate this code, just as I would do, just if I'd done jacking. And so yeah, so now I can kind of make the choice about whether I want to experiment in the terminal UI or the editor UI for the REPL. And so this is quite useful because if my editor crashes, then my REPL is still running. I don't lose any REPL state. And obviously I can run this, run the REPL on a remote server or a shared server. So this is also great for pairing. So if I go to Visual Studio Code, if we go and I'm still learning how to use Visual Studio Code, so bear with me a second. We're going to open a folder, Brave Clojure. Oh yeah, okay. We open that. Save, there we go. So we've got here. Where is the deps? Did I open the right one? I don't. Yeah, there we go. Oh, can't see for real. Yeah, so this is the same file with the same deps.edn file, and I can go in and start the REPL, and then instead of doing jack-in, I can just connect to the REPL server as well. It's a CLI, just a normal CLI one with no the additional things in there, and see it's already picked up the same port, and then we connect. And so if you've got shared REPL, this is good for pairing as well, because you can both use the same tools, you can both use the same REPL, but use your own tools, your own editor setup to connect to that REPL, and then just share the source code via GitHub, which you would do anyway. So when you're swapping over who's driving and who's typing, then you don't have to use somebody else's computer. You can kind of use your computer, but still pair on the same REPL. So it does add up a few nice options as well. And we've used this approach for kind of mob programming through the data science community as well. So we have a shared REPL on a remote server, and then you can all connect using whichever editor. So we've had Spacemacs, Cider, Visual Studio Carver, and Clojure all connecting to the same REPL, and being able to work that way. And then you just share the code via GitHub or GitLab in the normal way. Let's see how we're doing. We're getting to how much of that chapter have we covered? Okay, so we've run the REPL. We've done a few different things with Clojure CLI Tools. All the rest of this stuff is the same, regardless of whether you're doing whether you're using Lining or Clojure CLI Tools. And then we're on to the Clojure editors. What's this mentioning? It's mentioning Sublime 2. I don't think there's that many people using it, but I'm sure there are some people. Vim's got some good setup for that as well. Counterclockwise, I think, is pretty much gone. Cursive is still alive and kicking, and it's if you're used to using a Java IDE, if you're used to using IntelliJ, then it's a good approach to use Cursive. There is a free or non-commercial version you can use for free, but if you're using that commercially, then I encourage you to get your company to pay for that. Nightcode was a nice tool, but it seems to have stopped. It's actually gone into archive mode on GitHub, so it doesn't seem to be any future development on there. But if you go to, there's a lot more than this suggests. If you go to my ever-growing book, I do have a section on Clojure-aware editors. And so there is an ever-growing list of things I'm adding to here. So obviously I'm using Emacs and Spacemacs a lot. I do really like NeoVim and Clojure. This is a fairly new thing for Clojure development with Vim. So mostly people have been using Fireplace, but Clojure is a really nice tool. and you don't have to use Vim script to configure it. You can use Fennel, which is a Clojure-like language, to configure that as well. So it's a little bit nicer and friendlier if you're not familiar with Vim script. And this works really nicely. I do really like it. It's a really nice, simple way to get going if you're happy with Vim. And talking about my Vim obsession, which has developed over the last few years, you can use Carver with Vim. That's what I'm doing here. Oh, I don't think I've done that in. I'll need to fill that in. I'll do that today. So there's you can use Carver, which is VS Code extension, which is what I've been doing here with the. Saw that briefly with the other plugin, with the other editor. This is really nice, and I've got it set up. I don't really like the key bindings of Carver. That was a big turn off at me, but then that's the same thing for vanilla Emacs as well. But I can do space, and I can get the space max experience using vspace code here. And I can go in, I can start a REPL, I can do all sorts of things there as well. Oops, this could be. So if I do comma, then it's the kind of major mode menu. So I can jack in, connect to a REPL, disconnect from a REPL, do structured editing, evaluate things as well. So it gives me, most important kind of key bindings. And this is still driving Carver, so this is kind of just a configuration for using vspace code and Carver. So I'll document this, how I've done this. And it's just the Carver extension as normal, but then I've added vspace code in here as well. And this adds a few extra things that's quite nice, like fuzzy searching and which key. So basically which key is what's driving this. And I've just done a pull request to add all these key bindings specifically for Clojure. So that's a nice alternative. One thing to be slightly aware of with Carver is they're going through some interesting times at the moment. They're migrating over to Clojure LSP tools. So you might notice, if you use the latest version of Carver, you might notice a little bit of extra memory being used briefly while it's processing, because it's basically doing the same thing as Cursive and IntelliJ. It's doing a lot of static analysis in the background, and so there is a little bit more resources up front to get that to work. But I think in the long run it will be a really nice addition to Carver, and it also makes tooling a lot easier to build and a lot more consistent to build across lots of different editors. And for the moment, I think I'm just on a different version. I think I'm just on, this one, 136, which doesn't have Clojure LSP on, but then you also don't get the refactoring stuff either. But it's not something I use at the moment yet. And then for the other tools, so there's the classic Space Max, Space Vim Fireplace. There's also Vim Iced, which is really nice. Again, another Vim option. Atom and Chlorine, especially if you want like a really tailored REPL experience. I suggest, I'm going to add a link to Sean Caulfield's setup for this as well. So this is for Atom, but they're also doing one for Visual Studio Code as well. So if you like using Chlorine, but you want to use Visual Studio Code instead, then that's a possibility. And there's there's Visual Studio Code without the Vim obsession that I have, and of course IntelliJ and Cursive as well, which is more like kind of the Java IDE experience that you may be used to if you've come from the Java world. Cool. So there's a lot of choice. I'm not sure if there's like a de facto editor I'd recommend these days. I think my recommendations do kind of show my leanings towards Vim style editing, but you don't have to kind of be obsessed about that as I am. But I think Atom and Chlorine is quite nice. Kind of simple but very configurable experience. Clojure is very good if you want to. I think a lot of new people are kind of using VS Code and then using Clojure because of that. And then, yeah, Emacs and Spacemacs. I guess you can see, because I've written a book about it, you can kind of tell that's my main tool. And I think there's a lot of really nice things that have been in Spacemacs for a long time, such as kind of, yeah, here you can see the CLI inspector, which allows you to kind of navigate and page through large amounts of data and complex data structures. These things are coming to other browsers through different tools. So if you do want to browse through inspectors, it started off quite simple with this Clojure inspector many years ago, and it's come to something much more interesting like Portal, where you can really kind of drill down and browse through things. So this is using the relatively new kind of tap approach. So if you want to inspect a value, you can send it as a so you can send it to Portal, and you can kind of go and navigate that that value in detail. And Reveal is kind of taking that even further, where it's also trying to visualize things as well. So you can actually do create tables and graphics, like 2D graphics from your data structures inside Reveal. And so it is a nice way to not just navigate and explore your data, but also visualize that data as well. And there's a new thing they're adding to visualize things using the Vega graphics specification, so you can generate kind of data science style graphs and plots there quite nicely as well. Oh, how are we doing? Oh, over time. I'm just going to check the questions in the chat to see if there's anything else we can add, but otherwise I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Yes, if you're using Emacs, then org mode is a nice way to kind of create some literal programming. I think I do have a section on that in one of the other books, in the Spacemacs book, I think. Oops, no, that's the wrong website. So you can actually use Emacs org mode and embed Clojure into kind of as a living document, which I guess is like kind of the basics of a lot of the data science notebooks. You're actually writing a document that's got living code in that gives you the results as well. It's the same thing for you can do that with inside Spacemacs as well, and it's fairly simple. You can just create a project here and actually just run and evaluate code with inside your org mode document, your text document that you're actually running. Yes. This is a fairly simple example, but it's pretty much once you get it running, once you get the project running, then it's there's not much extra you need to add. Anything else? Cursive is free. Yeah, okay, they've changed the... Yeah, you do need to have a license, even if you're using it Cursive for free. But yeah, it's if you want kind of that kind of static analysis, if you need that, then it's probably worth managing the license each time as well. And again, if you can get your company to buy developer licenses, then that would be appreciated by the Cursive developer. I'm going to do some more things specifically about using different tools outside of the live broadcast as well. So I'm going to try and elaborate on like some good practices to use for using the REPL. And one of the blogs I'm starting to write, this is just on the test blog website. So this is where you see all my hectic ideas before I've really realized them properly. And kind of tips to avoid kind of restarting the REPL, again, like by running an external REPL, evaluating the source code and stuff like that. So there's a few tips on here I'm going to expand on, and I'll share those with you soon. anything else? I think that's about it. Boom, boom, boom. Oh yeah, and then there's a discussion I'm having with myself about whether to jack in or connect. I have been using jack in quite a lot because it's convenient, but I think if you want to have a more curated kind of REPL experience and add extra tools on, then I think using connect does have some advantages. And the biggest advantage of running an external REPL like we've done today, because I think we've still got that running. Yeah, we've still got this running. See, if you've got this, even if it's on your local host, you've got this running in its own separate process, and you can have this running with or without a user interface. So I could just run this as an nREPL server without having a REPL prompt, and that means it's isolated from any kind of crashes from any editors. Or you can actually, like, if you're a bit like me, you might use different editors on different days, and so you're not tied to a particular editor. Here I'm just using nREPL alias to add in the libraries that the editors need to be able to connect to the REPL. So that's the only extra thing you need to do when you're running the REPL. But if you're using nREPL, then all the editors that use that protocol pretty much use the same library. And if you're using the socket REPL, then it's all kind of built into Clojure anyway. So I don't think there's much to add. Although I did add, yeah, there is an alias in the Practicalli Clojure deps.edn thing here for socket REPL as well. Oops, wherever it is. So there's a socket. Yeah, it's running a socket server. And so you can set the port, default port if you want as well. And there's also some nice clients as well, because socket REPL is a very basic protocol. It's not as comprehensive as nREPL, so you do need a client on there. Obviously, the using Cider nREPL library gives you that client, so you need something equivalent to that. I think I did come across Tubular from Mike Fikes, which does help you use socket REPL easily, and also you can use it with the self-hosted JavaScript approaches as well. So there are ways to make socket REPL really simple to use, and it's what the Atom and Chlorine approach does. They use the socket REPL and some very nice configuration from Sean Caulfield to help you use that very, very effectively and give all kind of the same kind of features you would get from using Cider. So there's another question in the chat. You could run the REPL on a Raspberry Pi and then connect remotely for a nice little hosting project. Yes, you could. Especially if you wanted, if you did it securely as well. If you got it set up over like SSH, and then you could even do it remotely from your own house. If you got Raspberry Pi running in your own house with a secure connection to a nice secure firewall, then you could actually, well, if we were allowed out, you could actually do it when you're outside, when you're in a different location to the actual Raspberry Pi as well. Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to leave it there. Oh, we've got, yes. I hope they found that useful. There's probably a ton more, but I think that we've covered pretty much everything in the first chapter of the book. Oops, wrong button. There we go. Oh. Yes, we've done the first one. I would advise kind of skipping over this, or not necessarily using the configuration in here. I'm not quite sure how up to date this is. Where is it? There's a. Oh, it does say they're constantly being updated, but I'm not entirely sure. I've never looked. Just gonna look. 13 months ago, so I probably do advise, if you are using Emacs, then you've got Prelude, you've got Doom, and you've got Spacemacs, which are probably used a lot more than this, I would imagine, and have a lot more features, I guess, in there as well. It's quite a lot for one person to just build an Emacs configuration with everything in there. But if you, it does give you an interesting kind of overview of Emacs as well. But just to kind of ignore these, because they may be, some of the key bindings may be slightly different depending on which distribution of Emacs you're using, which community configuration you're using. Yeah, and some of the things you might not need to do for this as well. But as a quick overview of Emacs, if you were interested, then it kind of gives you a flavor of what you can do in vanilla Emacs. Cool. Grand. I like that. I should use that more often. Let's just grand grommet. Okay, I'm going to leave you all there. I hope you found that useful. And if you've got any questions, feel free to follow up in the usual channels. Discord, Zulip, or Slack. I tend to be in Zulip more, but I do keep an eye on all the others as well. And you can also mention me as well if you want. That makes sure I kind of see your questions and might respond to them a bit quicker as well. Okay, thank you very much, and see you next time. I hope you stay safe and well, and I might have a shave by next time as well, if you're lucky. Okay, thanks very much. Goodbye.